All right, welcome everyone to an introduction to restorative justice dialogue. My name is Jennifer Robertson, and I'm the adult program librarian at the Carbondale Public Library. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for this evening. Joe Cervantes is the State's Attorney of Jackson County. He attended SIUC, or Southern Illinois School of Law, and began his career as an assistant state's attorney with Williamson County. He's also worked as a prosecutor with Saline County. After working in Saline County, he went into private practice. And prior to becoming an attorney, he was in the United States Marine Corps. As the State's Attorney of Jackson County, he has created the Ready to Play program, which has provided free music lessons to underprivileged kids in Jackson County. In the future, he plans on implementing a new restorative justice program in the county. We also have Dolene York Anderson with us today. Dr. Dolene York Anderson is a clinical psychologist and the executive director of Family Advocacy Services. She has a PhD in psychology from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and she has also recently received restorative justice facilitator training from Ted Lewis. She has years of experience working with families, individuals, and the youth of Jackson County. Welcome. We also have Myla Croft, who was instrumental in getting this all put together. Myla is a recipient of the Vince DiMuzio internship at the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and she's working as an intern for the Jackson County State's Attorney's Office. She is a junior at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, studying political science with a specialization in pre-law with a minor in global studies. And she's currently working with the State's Attorney's Office to bring a new restorative justice program to Jackson County, as well as helping to sustain the Ready to Play program. And finally, the speaker today is Ted Lewis, who is coming from Duluth, Minnesota, and he is a restorative justice practitioner, trainer, and consultant for the Center for Restorative Justice and Peacemaking at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. Since the mid-90s, Ted has been active in the restorative justice field as a facilitator, program manager, trainer, and adjunct professor. His specialty is conference facilitation work for harming and harmed parties. In 2016, he founded the Restorative Church website project, and he also serves on the executive committee for the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice. So welcome, panelists, and we will go ahead and turn it over to Ted.
Thank you, Jennifer. And it's great to have partnership here with the library and with the DA's office and with Dolene, your family agency. So this is wonderful to all be together. Restorative justice is a term that people have been hearing now and then, and for some people it's a new term. And one way I think about it is it's an alternative approach to justice that really lifts up community involvement. It lifts up the possibility of dialogue between harming and harmed people who go through preparation and support. It lifts up the whole concept of repairing harm. When we understand crime as mostly a harm done rather than just a law broken, it really opens up a new window to think about who needs to come together and really talk about what happened, talk about the impacts to people, talk about solutions and reparations that make sense to everybody. And this has been a type of justice that's been around for centuries. Many indigenous societies and tribal societies worldwide have had restorative type practices. Because if you think about it, when people have to coexist in communities, especially smaller village type communities, you can't just alienate people. You can't just punish people for punishment's sake. There has to be some kind of reparation, restoration, restitution, all those words that have RE in front of it. And what's happened in the last 40, 45 years is that in North America, this community-based type of justice has really grabbed hold of people's imagination, and there's new programming. It has worldwide growth right now, some places faster than others. And what I find amazing about restorative work is that it applies at such a wide level. It applies to schools where a fourth grader is chronically taking pens and pencils out of his or her teacher's desk. And there's an opportunity, maybe it's 5 minutes, to really help that student think about how they live in a web of community, how their actions ripple out and affect other people. And so a restorative chat can sometimes happen in a school. And in a mid-zone, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a restorative conference model where people might come together for 2 hours for deep conversation about a crime. And then if you go to the largest level, the macro level, we can see examples like in South Africa, where with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the mid-90s, led by Desmond Tutu and others, that was essentially a restorative justice process where truth-telling could happen, where victimized families had a chance to feel dignified in sharing their stories, where offending people were able to come forward and apologize for actions that they could own. Not everyone participated in that could, but enough people did, and enough people in society bore witness to that process so that the whole society was able to shift from an apartheid era into a new era that Nelson Mandela helped to usher in. So I want you to try to get a picture that restorative justice is wide application. It applies to the criminal realm, school realm. It can apply to workplaces where people are trying to build cultures of apology and listening and forgiveness. It can happen in church communities, neighborhoods. We're talking about life skills that involve basic listening, respect, building trust back. I'd like to just tell a story at this point, just to sort of ground restorative ideas in something that's practical and you can relate to as a story. And then after that, I'd like to show a PowerPoint that'll get us more into the theory. And eventually, I'm really hoping that we can have a robust time of questions and answers and discussion. So while I'm sharing more, I hope you start percolating some questions in your head that you can bring up a little bit later. This is a story that involves a restorative conference program that I was in. So a dialogue-based program for youth offenders. And these were cases that were diverted from the court. That means instead of going through a court process, they basically went to our nonprofit. And I was program manager of a great program. I had about 20 volunteers who had training. And we were getting about 10 cases a month to handle through this dialogue-based process. A case that really stays strong in my memory actually had the meeting on September 11th, 2001. Believe it or not, 9/11, almost 20 years ago. I remember that morning after the whole nation was getting the news and we saw the towers come down and we were rocked. I called both the victim party and the offender party. And I said, you know, I know we have our joint dialogue scheduled today. We can postpone it. We can easily meet another day. Both parties wanted to still meet that day. We had a 5 o'clock meeting scheduled, and I and another facilitator ended up following through with that scenario. The two of us as facilitators had already met with both parties. This was a case involving a 16-year-old boy who had stolen a four-wheeler, sometimes called a quad. He had that four-wheeler for about 2 months and didn't quite know what to do with it at the end of that time. But it definitely impacted the family, and the police finally caught up with the youth. He was invited to go through a restorative process, and he chose to. He came to that joint meeting with his 26-year-old brother. He did not have a father figure except for his brother in his life. So the two of them came, and the mother and father of the impacted family came. They also had 3 sons, but they didn't come for this initial meeting. So there were 4 of them, 2 of us facilitators. We had a 2-hour meeting. That's a pretty long time, a lot longer than you might imagine just a theft of a 4-wheeler would take place in a court. But there was a lot to talk about. And one of the things that really stood out to me in that time was that the 16-year-old boy apologized 4 different times in the course of our time together. What that told me is that each time he was hearing something new about how his actions were affecting, the other family, from his heart, he wanted to offer some kind of an apology when he learned that. And that's a great indication that he was present. He was taking things empathetically, responding back. That's not always the case, but he very much was there. Another thing that really stands out in my memory of that case is that after the father kind of went through a whole list of impacts to their family, like a vacation was ruined where they were going to take their 4-wheeler. He recounted a time, I guess it was the night of the theft, when his 10-year-old son had a little bedtime prayer. And the father sort of said it like this to our group during that meeting. He said, "My son did not pray, 'Dear God, let the guy get caught so we can get our 4-wheeler back.' And the father said, 'My son did not pray, 'Dear God, let this guy get caught so he can get punished.' He said, 'My son prayed this way that night. He said, "Dear God, let this guy get caught so he can know what it does to others." Now that's pretty amazing for a 10-year-old to have that kind of insightful prayer, because he basically nailed the social psychology of a restorative dialogue process. When responsible parties come to grips with how their actions have affected other people, it starts to open up within their brains an awareness that they're not alone in the world, that their actions do have ripple effects. And those ripple effects can be harming to other people and impactful. And once especially a teenager starts to come to grips with how they live in a web of relationships and how their actions can actually affect other people and not just themselves, it starts to open up respect and empathy and human connection. And so that 10-year-old really nailed it, I thought. And when I heard it, I said, well, I'm going to use that in a presentation someday, as I am now. We talked through everything about what happened in the crime. We talked through all of the impacts, including impacts to the offender, because we want to be realistic that impacts go every direction. And then when people have had enough conversation and gifting each other verbally back and forth with respectful conversation about those 2 topics, then we shift into the future. We talk about reparations. We start to get more practical, and facilitators help the parties to jot down ideas for reparation. And then a signed agreement can be even made and tracked by the program. And in this case, I think the youth had to do 5 conditions that group mutually decided on. It's all consensual. He had to do some community service work. He had to pay some money back for the damages done to the 4-wheeler. Wrote an apology letter to the 3 boys who weren't at that meeting. He had to show progress in his spring school semester. And one other thing, that's a lot to do, even after going through a dialogue process. I've known offenders who actually choose not to do restorative justice because they think it's harder and more demanding than just getting a traditional punishment. So I want to give the impression that while dialogue is really at the heart of resolving things between people so they can rebuild trust, that itself builds a new motivation for the offender to have a higher responsibility to make things right, to make amends, to not repeat negative behaviors, to make life changes, to not recidivate. So this again is part of the research in restorative justice, that when responsible parties actually meet with the victim parties of their case and have respectful dialogue, they are less likely to recidivate in the future. There's a fair amount of research that's already substantiating that. Well, that's a story. In a bit, I want to do the PowerPoint, but one of the things I want to kind of draw out from this is that unless people open up at a heart level, this kind of work really can't happen. And we all know that in today's world, we often stay in the head zone defensively around divisive topics or conflicts or whatever the tough issues are that separate us from people. We usually stay in the head zone and keep our shields up. Restorative dialogue at its best helps people to bring those shields down, listen to what other people have gone through. And that includes victims listening to the stories of offenders and what their lives are like too. And once they connect, things open up for them to start imagining that they can coexist in the same community. They can bump into each other on the streets. They can bump into each other at a supermarket and not avoid each other. Like sometimes we might want to avoid someone we don't want to see. But when this process works good, people want to bump into each other and ask, hey, how is it going? How are you doing? Because all of that negative energy, that emotional barrier melts away when this kind of dialogue work is done well. So let me transition into a screen share, and I'll pull up my PowerPoint. And once again, when I'm done with the PowerPoint, I'm hoping we can move quickly into a time of Q&A and discussion. So get your questions lined up. Okay, is that coming on the screen okay? Jennifer, can you give me a positive nod if the PowerPoint is up? Or Myla, is the PowerPoint up?
It's up.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry, I have too many screens in front of me. I can't tell.
Okay, we're good. We're good. So here's where I want to start. I often bring this up if I'm teaching this in college. How one defines a crime will inform how one defines justice. Let's think a little bit about this, because there's different ways to define crime. Just think of it. If you had to define crime in just a short phrase, what comes to mind? When I ask this to a student group, most of their answers fall into two buckets. They either say crime can be defined as broken laws or broken rules, or they say there's something broken between people, broken relationships. We can also use the word violation in both of these areas. Laws are violated, but human beings can also be violated. And frankly, we would not have laws if people weren't deeply impacted by an act of crime. So we can kind of see how they go together. What I want to suggest is that restorative justice puts a little more emphasis on the broken relationships, what's broken between people, rather than the broken law. And that's not to say both aren't applicable, but in Western justice, there tends to be such a high focus on dealing with broken law and the punishment that matches it, that sometimes we forget that there's real people with real emotions and real relationships at stake here. So if crime sets negatives in motion, and by negatives, I mean creating disruption, disconnection, distrust between people, It stands to reason that justice should set positives in motion to reverse that, creating peace, connection, trust between people. And perhaps we know some examples of how even in a justice process, a traditional, conventional justice process, sometimes some additional negatives are set in motion for people. They might feel disempowered. They might feel like they don't have a voice. They might feel like lawyers are making all the decisions and they really don't feel empowered to really be involved, or families don't feel like they have a significant involvement. So we're looking at a type of justice that's always done to create more positives for those who are involved, and that includes some empowerment. Now, if I had to boil down restorative justice into just two concepts, kind of my elevator speech, I would say it focuses mostly on the harm done rather than just the law broken, and it engages those who are most involved, those who are responsible for the harm, those who have been harmed, and anyone in close proximity to what happened. Once you focus on the harm, and once you engage those who are mostly involved rather than just leaving it to professionals, you get communication processes at the center stage, communication processes rather than legal processes to now seek solutions and repairs to those harms. This all kind of flows naturally. Focus on the harm, empower the people most involved. It's going to involve communication, open communication, strength-based communication. Now, we've heard politicians speak about being hard on crime and its opposite being soft on crime. Usually when someone says, we got to be harder on crime, they mean that the accountability is high and the support is low. And the opposite of this, of course, is if you're soft on crime, you're going to have low sentences and higher supports. We see this debate played out all the time when politicians talk. And there's only one positive option here, folks, and that's to be hard on crime. You will not hear a politician say, we need to be softer on crime. So there's a fallacy in this debate. And that's that accountability and support work in inverse relationship to each other. There's no reason why they can't work together, why they both can't be strong. This is what I call being smart on crime, where you still have high accountability, but now in terms of good responsibility and reparation rather than punishment for its own sake. And you dignify offenders so that they're supported well, so that they want to step up to the plate and be responsible for what they did as well as moving forward. This is basically the essence of good parenting right here. Parents love the heck out of their kids and they keep very clear and consistent boundaries. And restorative justice aspires to that same kind of balance. This is a quote from Howard Zehr, one of the pioneer figures in the movement. He writes, restorative justice requires at minimum that we address victims' harms and needs, hold offenders accountable to put right those harms, and involve victims, offenders, and communities in this process. This is from a book called Changing Lenses from 1990, one of the earliest books that starts using the phrase restorative justice. So if you want to do a deeper dive, I recommend this book. I like how he uses the phrase holding offenders accountable to put right those harms. We're not talking about taking your medicine now. We're talking about doing something positive in that negative zone that you created. When we think about our traditional view of justice, we have Lady Justice with the three symbols, the scales, the blindfold, the sword. Of course, we see this image in statues and artwork and lots of court buildings across the nation, even worldwide. I was in Brazil and this figure was everywhere. And these symbols, they certainly represent good values. I don't want to denigrate them. Fairness and equity and reason, objectivity. These are important values in our justice system. and they have a very important role. What I want to suggest is that they also can lead to a limited focus on law rather than harm. They can create a sense of opposition between sides, like a contest. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? And justice is really limited to a punishment perspective rather than a positive making things right. How about this for a completely different image that still has Lady Justice? Her symbols are in the room if they're necessary, but now at center stage in a justice process is communication, sharing, listening, people feeling heard, people feeling validated and dignified for the hard stuff that they've experienced, and then working together for solutions to live in the same community. Howard Zehr links 3 new values into this scenario, what he calls the 3 R's of relationship, respect, and responsibility. And all of these are going to lead down the path of listening-based dialogue. So let's think about models for dialogue now. When we want to have communication processes, we want to make sure there's balanced attention to those who are harmed, to those who have caused the harm, and we want to involve the community to support people, mobilizing community resources for facilitation, follow-ups for community service, mentoring, whatever it takes. Restorative justice wants to wrap around those most involved and affected so they're not alone in this journey. Here's just a picture of a typical conference. Sitting in a circle, but this is not what we call a formal circle with a talking piece. It's more of a facilitated model where facilitators will invite people to talk and ultimately want there to just be heart-to-heart direct conversation between the parties, and facilitators at best kind of back up their seats and get out of the way. Here's more of a formal circle in a school setting. Where there might be a talking piece, which means only one person is sharing at a time, but that heightens the listening among others. And these can be circles for community building around topics, or they can be peacemaking circles to address an actual incident. These 4 models have all stood the test of time. Mediation, conference, panel, circle, they all have the same ingredients, just like, you know, different Italian food will have the same ingredients, but put together in different ways, or the pasta looks different, or different ways to cook things. But they're all going to have listening-based dialogue as a centerpiece. Without dialogue, people are left with mistrust. They're left with their own narratives. They're left with some fear about what the other person might be doing. So we want bridge work to happen between folks. And bridge work is not just bringing people together, it's also connecting what I call speaking and the act of being heard. These are 3 parts of communication that restorative facilitators are really aware of, because it's one thing for someone to say something, it's another thing for people to listen. It's a third thing for someone to feel like, wow, I've really been heard. Now you understand me. And one way we get at this in these dialogue opportunities is facilitators will invite someone to echo back what they've heard. That can be a real gift to someone who doesn't feel like they've been respected for their experience. This pretty much allows people to move from the head zone to the heart zone. It's the heart zone where we find the common humanity between people. I've heard victims say, you know, after they have some more connection in a meeting, they'll say, you know, when I was a teenager, I did stupid things too. Well, that's a heart zone thing to say because it's connective. An apology, of course, is a deeply heart zone offering to another party. These are 6 standards that are pretty common in all restorative dialogue processes, especially in a conference model, which is my area of specialty for training and practitioner work. There's always preparation of people before you would bring them together, whether it's dispute or harm. It's always voluntary participation. We want to make sure that no one feels like their arm twisted into a opportunity to meet with someone else. Confidentiality is held by all, so that there's a sense of safety for what people say in meetings. Guided by trained facilitators. You don't have to have a lot of training. I do a 16-hour training, which I hope to do in Carbondale here sometime this next year. And that gives enough foundation for people to start doing initial cases, but then it's good to have additional advanced training too. Connective dialogue leads to shift. That simply means people shifting from the past to the future. If people are held to the past, they're not going to trust the other person. But once they do shift and their emotions are set to ease, they can talk about the future, and that involves consensual agreements that people put in writing. This is just some repeat from earlier things I've said. While legal rights of victims are important, the needs of victims are placed center stage. Needs being the need for losses recovered, the need to have a voice, the need to be empowered to feel like some trust can be earned again. And for offenders, accountability is not punishment, but is now taking responsibility to make things right. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but inside the word responsible or responsibility are two words, responsibility. This is illuminating because it helps us appreciate the fact that until someone has new content that they've heard, they don't have anything to respond to. And so we want to give these spaces of storytelling and people talking out of their hard experiences so that impacted people can have a voice, and responsible parties can literally take their newfound ability to respond from the heart and then be part of meaningful reparation. Here we see the same cycle here. Listening leads to people responding to each other, which leads to responsibility. This is really an amazing cycle of learning for youth who have patterns of misbehaving. Another progression. Restorative dialogue wants to move from accepting ownership, expressing empathy, and choosing reparation. This is sort of on the journey of an offender who can own what they did, feel for what other people have gone through, and then actually be part of a consensual process of determining what the repairs are to make things right. Same thing. Beginning of discussions involves stories. The middle discussion involves reviewing all impacts, and then the repairs. Can you see how this kind of naturally goes from past, present to future? This applies to all kinds of resolution processes, whether it's harm or dispute. Because again, if people are stuck to the past, they're going to keep their shields up. They're not going to want to live in the same community with someone else. And so we have to lead people from the past through their feelings in the present to a hopeful future in the context of this very dialogue process. With deep sharing, deep listening in those zones, some kind of shift will happen at this point. People start to relax. And fortunately, shift happens in this field of work. It's wonderful because this is really not what facilitators do. It's what parties do when they do the hard work of stepping up to the plate, being courageous enough, and finding these reconciling moments. Well, that's the PowerPoint, and I've done all the talking so far, so I'd love it if we can kind of go right into some questions and see what people are thinking at this point. And Dolene and Myla, maybe you have some opening questions we can start off with.
Dolene, I think you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you, Ted. In reference to preparing the victim and the offender to get together for these victim offender dialogues, to what extent are they prepared, like during the pre-conferencing preparation periods? What does that look like? And especially when you include the families.
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually for a diversion level referral, which might mean a property crime or a simple assault, it usually just involves one preparation meeting on each side. And those can last from an hour to an hour and a half. And in many ways, the same conversational terrain that would apply to a joint meeting applies to the preparation meeting. So you're getting people familiar with the conversation that would happen if they go the next step. What happened, who was affected, what are possible repairs. And really what's happening in those preparation meetings is just trust building. You know, people naturally don't have trust. They don't have trust for the other party. They don't have trust a lot of times for the justice system. And so these preparation meetings with a couple of facilitators present are building up credits of trust where there's natural debits of trust. And once there's enough of that trust, then people generally want to go further to be part of a joint conversation.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that we have some comments in the chat section. I've seen a couple from Mary O'Hara. Mary, did you have some questions that you wanted to pose?
I will go ahead and unmute you, Mary.
Yeah, Mary, you're being acknowledged. We see that your hand is raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good, good. Thank you so much. I have been really inspired by the notion of restorative justice for over 20 years and been following it at various levels. So I'm really excited about having this conversation in Carbondale, because as we move towards a place where we're trying to understand the violence, the gun violence in Carbondale, I believe restorative justice is one of the most important tools that we can use. And I just want to use two examples of this. And this was a number of years ago. I've been very much participant in neighborhood groups. And after there was a shooting on Walnut Street, which a local musician was killed as he tried to help people flee a shooting that occurred on Walnut Street, the Arbor District organized a meeting about this incident. And also the study circles group also discussed it. And there was one theme that I remember most poignantly about the conversation. And that is that people wanted to understand the people and hear the voices of the people who had participated in that. And we still have no opportunity for that. And I still crave that. I crave that kind of vehicle for understanding. I put this in my question as well in a more recent incident that occurred in Carbondale at the Casey's a convenience store that is located by our high school. Now, I don't know how familiar, Mr. Lewis, I wouldn't expect you to be familiar with this. Dolene, I don't know if Dolene recalls, I don't, Myla, but it was a situation in which there is a long-standing issue of shoplifting with young people at the Casey's. And this situation evolved into something that took, an incredible amount of space on social media and debates, but there was no vehicle for bringing together the voices of those people impacted by the situation. Yet you could hear them mention, who were they? The Casey's store attendants and how these incidents were affecting them. There was the person that was affected by the police who was accused of the shoplifting. There was the school, there was the church. All these voices brought together bring us to a greater understanding of issues in our community. I have witnessed the power of restorative justice by participating in a program that Lutheran Social Services out of Marion did probably 10 or 15 years ago, when we were actually doing this in Jackson County, but received no institutional support. So we could not keep it going. But I actually witnessed sea changes. You could actually feel the change when people heard each other's stories. I'll never forget hearing the story of a group of young boys who had been bullied by a group of older boys and then went out and victimized some other people. And you just began to see a bigger impact. We all did. So I am so grateful for the library holding this. I hope now, as we go through a process in our city of Carbondale, where we are going to be deciding how to allocate money to deal with violence in our neighborhoods, that the restorative justice movement has a strong, strong voice. And I would be happy to be a part of that, put my time into it. I have studied the restorative justice movement nationally with my students at John A. Logan College, Dolene.
Yes, I remember.
And I have traveled to Northern Ireland and witnessed storytelling and restorative justice between Catholics and Protestants and the impact of that, and how they work with people in South Africa to look for programs that brought together education, policing, other kinds of things into the restorative justice mode. There's my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mary. And I would like to respond to some of the things that you mentioned. I've been working on trying to bring a restorative justice program to Carbondale since January of 2020, starting with working with a lot of the churches. It's a paradigm shift for a lot of people in this area to think about actually empowering the offender to some extent, giving the offender a voice, but it also empowers the victim in that it gives the victim a voice. But it takes time to educate people. And I've been on an educational campaign, my board and I, talking individually with people. And we were on a roll doing great until COVID hit. And then we had to start trying to do things by Zoom. And we've been searching for grant funding to assist us in bringing a program to this area. So, Mary, I will definitely add your name to the list of interested people.
Thank you. Please do. I believe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
I believe restorative justice, if you look at the recommendations during the Obama presidency, if you look at the NAACP's recommendations for crime, restorative justice is always a part of those. And I would really like to bring the experience of over 20 years of following the social movement. I'm a sociologist. I have my PhD in sociology. And I would like to bring my experience to making this come alive in Carbondale because it's transformative.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that, Mary. It sounds like you bring a lot of wisdom and experience, and you're making a good case for this work to be revived. I'm seeing one question from Van, who's asking about people coming out of prisons, they've repaid their debt to society by doing time, and yet a lot of times they come back into society and society is not accepting them as if they have a clean slate. They often still wear a badge, and it's hard for them to get work or whatever. And this is partly because we as a society are not restorative in our mindset, and we're not creating those opportunities for people to really have fresh starts as we would think would be important. Fortunately, there are restorative reentry programs here and there in the nation that you can learn about, and those are really designed to help people make amends and to really have the deeper dignifying supports that they deserve. Myla, I don't know if you had a question coming out of the PowerPoint time, but feel free if you want to ask something also.
I didn't have a question right off the top of my head.
Okay.
I have another question. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. In reference to the model that I was initially proposing in terms of bringing a restorative justice program to this area for first-time juvenile offenders, we did some role playing at Hopewell Church on a restorative justice program, and I had written scripts for people to, practice like you did with the training that you did for us when I took the training, Ted, in November. But one of the interesting things that came out of that role play was the victim did not want to forgive the offender. In fact, the victim wanted the offender to be punished. So how do you get the victim to come around to be more supportive of buying into this paradigm shift, getting away from punishment to resolution and reparation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one simple answer is it's not a job of a facilitator to change people. Our job is just to hold space where dignifying conversation can happen, and we pretty much accept people where they are. And that includes both victims and offenders. Our job is just to make sure it's respectful and as good and empowering as it can be. But one thing that does kind of help is just to extend the preparation time with an impacted party who may have strong feelings or is not really wishing anything positive for the offender. Just extend the preparation time a little bit longer until they feel like they're bringing something to the table that is constructive both for them and the other party. And generally that can make a difference for helping people know that when they come together, it's about people connecting and listening to each other and getting people to echo back and form some kind of a connection during that dialogue. Looks like a new question here too in the chat. Do you want me to field that one, or do you want to read it, Myla?
There's also one in the Q&A box that's been in there for a little bit. So I don't know, maybe we could get
maybe
that
one. Of you can read it. Okay. Benny has asked, for this to succeed, do the police need to buy into it? It certainly helps. All the programs that I've been involved with over the years, I've had police officers or chiefs on the board in the program. And so that really helps strengthen the partnership. Sometimes cases can be diverted directly from a police department, but most often police pass on a chargeable case to the district attorney's office, and then they're handling it and sending it to a nonprofit through a diversion program. So it's not vital that the police are directly involved, but the more they know about it, the better they can talk about it to people at the front end and say, this is an available program in the community, and you might really benefit from it.
Okay, there's Jill Adams has a question in the question and answer. Jill, did you want to ask your question yourself, or do you want me to read it?
She's not going to be able to answer you, so why don't you just go ahead and read it?
Okay. Jill says, we have a local organization, Dispute Resolution Institute Incorporated, that has long been doing mediation for certain kinds of court cases. I think I read they were starting a community mediation program. Have those of you wanting to start a restorative justice program talked with them about what they are doing? And I've talked to Missy Greathouse, and she and I have arrangements to get together to see how our programs can mutually make referrals. Those that people who may not be comfortable with restorative justice and just want to figure out a way that they can mediate, like you would go through an agreement settling on a divorce, who's going to get what. Those who want that type of model would go through the dispute resolution model that Missy oversees, and those who want to get at the heart of what drove this incident to happen in the first place, listen to each other, listen to each other's feelings, then they may choose a restorative justice program.
It'd be wonderful if there was some degree of partnership, because really a mediation dispute resolution center and a restorative dialogue program have a lot of common denominators. They abide by the same best practices of self-determination and party empowerment, confidentiality, voluntary involvement, consensual agreement. So a lot of overlap in terms of holding space for people to have hard but healing conversations.
Okay, so I have a question. Mr. Lewis, can you explain the restorative justice training that you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I do a 16-hour training, and that allows for 4 different role plays, because I really think experiential learning is probably the most important thing for people who really want to do a deep dive and become facilitators. You know, you can't learn how to swim unless you're right in the water. But in addition to the 4 role plays, people get a 50-page manual that they keep for a resource. We do 12-minute breakout exercises. So I do it on Zoom and in person. And so a lot of exercises in between times where I'm presenting like I am this evening. So kind of a wide combination of learning modalities, but the role playing is really at the center of it. And those are all criminal scenarios. You know, we'll do a burglary, we'll do an assault, we'll do a theft. So people get a wider variety.
When I participated in the training that you did in November, Ted, you could see the the difference in the victims and the offenders. I don't know, their expressions, their facial expressions, when they come to a point where they were able to hear one another, and it was almost like a sigh of relief that they were able to do that. And it was like a breakthrough experience for them. And I thought that was a very good experience for me to have experienced with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Van
Any other
Eichner had
questions?
his hand up.
Go ahead, Myla.
Van Eichner had his hand up. I'm not sure if he wanted to speak or not.
Van, I'm going to allow you to talk now.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank you all for hosting this event and being such gracious hosts. First of all, I just made a comment in the chat. I put my hand down because I was enjoying the dialogue, and I just thought maybe I would offer a thought. Our society has increasingly become more desensitized and more separate in ways. We built so many walls up, we forgot how to build bridges towards one another. The ideal of community is something that has to be humanizing. We have to go the extra effort to be able to empower each other to self-actualize. When we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know that part of that foundation for each of us is our basic needs have to be secure. A lot of things that occur in our society are systemic because people's basics aren't covered. We've become a society that doesn't really lean in and take care of each other in a way that is meaningful and powerful and impactful, because we need to change our pattern of behavior from one of answering the bell every time it rings and to really doing some active listening with one another and engaging each other in a way that we come up with common sense solutions for everyday problems for one another. That as a community that deals with hunger, deals with issues of childcare, that we look for the resources that were once common to us. We leaned in on our families, and we had people that had eyes that can see and ears that could hear, and they were moved to compassion. But if we don't change the dialogue from one that is about a punitive system of punish an eye for an eye, tough on crime, we will never have an opportunity to see the potential in what we could accomplish by being kind to one another.
Amen to all of that, Van. I'm so glad you're broadening the discussion beyond just responding to the incidents to transforming a whole culture in society. So I just really applaud everything you're lifting up here, because holistic restorative justice is not just about addressing incidents, it's about addressing environments.
Yes.
And that's the conditions of crime. It's the follow-up communities that people find themselves in. It's making sure that all those needs are met, like you said. So that's a much wider menu of opportunity, but really thankful you help broaden the discussion there.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. It's my pleasure.
Are there other questions or comments from the audience? Okay, I don't see anybody's hand up. Or Myla, Mary O'Hara. You're being acknowledged, Mary. Unmute yourself, please.
I just would like to, and Dolene, I'm so glad to hear about your work here. I did not know about that. I just would want to push the question of, what is the next step here in Carbondale? Because we know that our city is going to be putting some money into the question of violence in our neighborhoods. And I think it's very important that the restorative justice model gets put into play here. So what's the next step?
Dolene, if you want me to answer that, just let me know, or when you're finished.
You go on, Joe, and then I'll maybe add some comments later.
Sure. So Mary, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. I've been listening. I've learned through my life it's the best thing to do. And I've learned even more so over the last year and a half how important that is. I'm usually successful when I keep my mouth shut and listen to the people who know what they're talking about. So thank you for all the comments. Thank you, Ted, for doing this. And Myla, she has been amazing. I just want to answer that question. Dolene brought this to me when I first was elected. I talked about a encompassing approach to running the state's attorney's office and approaching criminal justice. There are things that work in our system. There are things that need improvement, without a doubt. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Dolene contacted me shortly after my election and talked to me about this restorative justice thing. And although I have I studied it, I've researched it prior to my running, I know about it from my experience as an assistant state's attorney and former prosecutor in different areas. I intended to learn more about it as a state's attorney. And so Mary, one of the things that she suggested is a program here, and she laid out some reasons why it would be important for the community. And I concur, I agree with her 100%. And so one of the things that I mentioned to her and why I put a pin in it until just Myla, until January this year, I think, was because there was a number of things that I needed to get organized and in line in my office before we started looking toward a restorative justice program that would link neatly with our criminal justice system here. And Dolene and I had similar ideas about restorative justice. So in January, we had a new Paul Simon Institute worker that came over here and worked in my office, who's been amazing. That's Myla Croft, and she's coordinated everything with Ted, with the library, so on and so forth. And one of the reasons why she did that is because I know that Ms. York Anderson has been working with her organization and looking at grants. But now I'm at a point where the grants are great, but I don't believe that our community can always just sit back and use that G word all the time. I want organizations and community organizations to go after these grants and eventually have a restorative justice program under her umbrella or under another community organization's umbrella. But I was able to start a few programs by just pushing through and bulldozing through the beginning of these things. And I asked how I could be of help. One of the things that I'm envisioning is for me to be able to jumpstart this. Let me be the jumper cables to the battery of restorative justice, so to speak. One of the things I wanted to do is add this into into my tool belt, the prosecutor's tool belt, to be able to divert low-level offenses and misdemeanors to a restorative justice program. Again, I don't think we can wait for a grant every single time, although we will be aggressively pursuing those. And Dolene, anything that I can do to help you or any other organization pursue those grants, I'm going to do, especially now that I'm on this topic. But right now, I've offered to kickstart this to send community members through training. That's why we're here today. I asked weeks ago if I could have volunteers to train to be, to take that next step in restorative justice and be trainers so that they can conduct, these type of meetings here in our community and help us out. And at first, all I was getting were responses like, well, that'd be great on my resume, or I'd like to take the class just to see what it's about. The thing is these classes take time and they take money from a lot of people. There's a lot of information. We have to pay people for their resources and their time. There's no way around that. And I've offered my office to pay for this training through our drug forfeiture funds and other programs that we have. So I would like to offer my office to have individuals sign up for this training. In return for the training, I'd like some community service back from them to be able to participate in some of these meetings. The next step for me is that I'd like to continue with this and have members from the community sign up. Tell Myla about their interest. Tell Dolene about about their interest, and let's get you going. Once we have people I know who are trained, who have been through Ted's training, we can take the next step there and start working on a bigger plan of how we're going to use our trainers, where we can use them, when we can use them. Meanwhile, I'll continue to coordinate with the Dispute Resolution Institute and any kind of mediation programs around the community. But we will have a restorative justice program or some glimmer of it by the end of the year here in 2022. I hope that answers your question.
Well, the next step for me, for family advocacy services, working in conjunction with the state's attorney's office, we've already submitted a grant proposal to the state of Illinois requesting funding to establish a restorative justice program in Carbondale. Hopefully we will be granted funding, and that funding would begin July 1 and end on June 30th. We're asking to set up a one-year pilot restorative justice program, working with the state's attorney with first-time juvenile offenders. And we would, of course, agree upon the type of offenses that the program would serve. In addition to that, my organization is pursuing 3 other sources of grant funding, and I'm working with the woman who helps me write all these grants. As soon as she gets back from vacation, we'll be looking at 2 other opportunities to submit a proposal. So grant funding is what we'll be seeking, but other avenues, we're open to those sources of funding as well.
And I hope that if we have people trained and go through the training, that we can continue the training of individuals and be able to hand, those individuals over to her organization under that umbrella, and then form a partnership. But for some reason, it doesn't go that route. I want to make sure we have members of the community who are trained, and we can seek other grants and other routes. But again, want to make sure that Jackson County is responsible for Jackson County, grant or no grant. But we need that grant, and we appreciate the work you're doing on that.
Okay, any other questions or comments from anyone? I see something in question and answer. Let's see what that is. Oh, they're asking if I'm going to be seeking funding from the city of Carbondale. Not at this time, but from the state of Illinois, yes.
And we have a lot of need for it outside of Carbondale as well. I know that we get focused on Carbondale. I have a lot of lower level offenses in county jurisdiction, also in Murfreesboro and towns like DeSoto and Elkville, and so on and so forth. So I know it's great we typically float toward Carbondale, but this is something needed countywide, especially.
Well, if anyone has any last questions, now's the time to raise your hand or put them in the chat or Q&A.
I don't see anyone with raised hands or any questions in the Q&A section.
Well, this program will be available on the library's YouTube channel, so you can find it and share it with anyone you think might be interested. So feel free to do that. I can also put all the contact information that was put in the chat and put it in a blog post on the library's website, so that can be in one place as well. So I just want to thank you all for speaking about this subject today, and to Ted Lewis for joining us here and telling us about what he does. And I think it just sounds really great to have a training in Carbondale or in the Southern Illinois area, I should say. So thank you all so much for the work that you're doing. It seems very important. I don't know if anybody else has any closing remarks, feel free.
Thank you. Hey, Jennifer, do you have I guess I wanted to just say thank you to everybody.
Okay.
Just to be clear, our preventative programs in our criminal justice system, we've been working on, like sponsoring the Midnight Run basketball at the Detman Center, a music program for the kids. But I'm not, I guess, overly idealistic to think that that's going to solve the problem by itself. One of the important things to remember for the community is I need a bunch of tools at my disposal. One of those very important tools that's been overlooked has been restorative justice. And we need to make sure that we implement this here so that we can utilize it. We've changed a long time ago it seems like a long time for me, but when I first got here, from the usual thinking of cases as did an offense occur and who did it and what should the punishment be. Now we want to make sure that we're looking at everything on a matter of harm. Was there harm? What was the harm and how can we repair it? In order to do that, I need community members to help me out. This is not something that I can do from my office by myself. When I ran, I talked about making sure that I was in the community and utilizing the community and their experience to be able to do my job and make the community safer. And so I need help doing this. We have drug court now as one of the diversion programs that I was just absolutely adamant about getting. Our first-time offender statutory diversion programs like first-time offender and second chance probation. Our preventative programs that I mentioned. We still have a lot of work to do. Mental health awareness, truancy issues, issues with getting resources to our probation department. I'd like resources for my office. I'd like a program director for all these different programs or a mental health coordinator. But ultimately, right now, where we are is to add one more tool to our community and to our prosecutor's office, which would be restorative justice. So we're looking at the underlying reasons of offenses and not just the defendant himself or herself. And so I thank everybody for being here. This restorative justice actually puts one in a position to take an active role in repairing the harms that they've done and healing not just themselves, not just the victim, but helping heal the community. Again, I need your help to do that. The next steps is to contact Myla Croft and let us know that you're interested in this program. I want to help this organization go after the grants that they need, but most of all, I want to bulldoze this idea into the community, let people know what we're trying to do, and I need participation for that. So please, if you're interested in taking the training and volunteering afterwards, not just the resume builder, but take a stake in this. Get the training, but only do so with a good intent, clear eyes and full heart, to learn how to do this, to get Ted Lewis's excellent experience and knowledge and put that to work here in Jackson County. If you do that, we'll be successful. So let them know, let us know, and let Myla know, and we will get the next steps taken care of. But I really appreciate the time. I know everybody's got something to do, and I'll stop talking on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.